I hereby open this academic ceremony in which Laura Hildegard Smeets will defend the academic thesis called the Auditor Learning Curve, Professional Development Through Learning from Errors and Coaching. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis?
Yes, thank you, dear Prorector. Dear Prorector, dear members of the Corona, dear family, friends, and colleagues, thank you for being here today. In the upcoming 15 minutes, I'm going to provide a short overview of my dissertation. My dissertation is about a topic that everyone in this room is familiar with in their daily work, making errors. From healthcare to auditing to engineering, no matter how hard we try, it's impossible to avoid making errors. In this dissertation, errors refer to unintended deviations from expected and desired results. Making errors is a topic that we rather would not like to talk about, right? Especially when it concerns our own errors. When you think back about one of your own errors at work, you might remember it as an embarrassing experience, as something that made you look bad. Well, that's not a surprise, given that making errors is often seen as an indicator of poor ability and poor performance. As a consequence, you tend to remain silent about your errors or you hide them altogether. While this keeps us feeling safe, it also robs us from the opportunity to learn from the error. Well, in order to not make the same error in the future, it's very important to learn from it, because errors provide us with a unique opportunity to develop our knowledge and grow as a professional. In this dissertation, we operationalize learning from errors as engagement in learning activities to understand the underlying causes of an error and to think about what could be done differently to avoid reoccurrence of the error. These learning activities can be performed individually or in social interaction with others, such as supervisors or colleagues. While learning from errors is important, it's easier said than done. Not everyone is lucky enough to learn from his or her errors. You might have a manager who is intolerant towards errors, or you have a high workload that keeps you from reflecting and learning. All in all, learning from errors does not occur automatically. Hence, in this dissertation, It's aimed to gain more insights into how and when professionals learn from their errors. Well, examining this topic needs to be done in a domain where making errors has consequences for the individual professional, but also consequences for the organization and even for society. It needs to be a domain where professionals typically face a high task complexity and the pressure to comply with professional standards that have been set by regulators. Well, the audit domain fulfills these requirements, and hence this dissertation focuses on this specific domain. In the audit domain, professionals typically face a high workload, a high complexity, and as a third characteristic, there is a hierarchy. Well, looking more into this hierarchy, the work by lower-ranking professionals is evaluated on a continuous basis by the direct supervisor. So when evaluating the work of their subordinates, supervisors typically have two vital roles. On the one hand, they need to detect and correct errors of the subordinates, and on the other hand, they also need to professionally develop their subordinates through coaching. Well, coaching in this dissertation refers to guiding inexperienced auditors to discover the best way of doing something by helping them to learn rather than instructing them. Well, in this dissertation, it first was aimed from the perspective of the subordinate to learn more about what do subordinates need in order to learn from their errors and how can they be enabled to learn and further their professional development. And on the other hand, we also wanted to know more about the perspective of the supervisor when the supervisors decide to invest in the professional development of their less experienced colleagues. Well, to answer these two questions, we performed 4 different studies. I will summarize the results of these 4 studies. First, from the perspective of the subordinates, how can direct supervisors enhance or hinder professionals to learn from their errors? Well, to answer this question, I conducted interviews as a research method. One of the main findings was that creating a psychological safe environment, which is an environment where subordinates believe that they will not be blamed or punished when committing an error, is a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition to initiate professionals learning from errors. Besides creating a psychological safe work environment, it's also important that supervisors actively create the opportunity for professionals to learn from their errors through the provision of timely and explanatory feedback. Well, that means that they need to know not only what went wrong, but also why it went wrong. In study 2, again from the perspective of the subordinate, it was explored which specific factors drive professionals to engage in learning behaviors after making an error. Well, I examined this with regard, I used this survey among early career auditors. Well, what we found here first is that organizations can actively encourage professionals to learn from their errors by creating a supportive learning from error climate, which refers to a work environment where professionals are encouraged to perceive errors as sources of learning instead of as embarrassing events. Well, what we found was that a supportive learning from error climate reduces the error strain, which refers to negative emotions elicited by errors, and in turn, it promotes engagement in learning activities to learn from the error. We found that a supportive learning from error climate and error strain explain 42% of the variance in engagement in learning activities, which can be considered as a large effect. Second, under the condition that the work environment is perceived as tolerant towards errors, negative emotions elicited by errors function as a warning signal, and as such, alert the need to learn. Well, the result here again highlights the importance of developing an error-tolerant environment. Then third, from the perspective of the supervisors, which factors drive or inhibit supervisors to invest time on coaching their subordinates? Well, for this purpose, I conducted interviews with supervising auditors. Well, first results reveal that subordinate characteristics impact a supervisor's coaching behavior. So what we found here is that from the perspective of the supervisor, when you feel like, okay, this person is open to my coaching, or this person is going to do something with my feedback, you're more likely to invest time on professionally developing your subordinates. Also, proactively asking for coaching is very important, such that supervisors perceive like, okay, it's worthwhile to invest my time in the professional development of this particular subordinate. The data also revealed several contextual factors that impact the supervisor's decision to invest time on coaching their subordinates. We found that high time work demands of the supervisors themselves, as well as the high workload of their subordinates, decrease reviewers' coaching efforts. Also, the perception of low priority on coaching in their firm and understaffing discourages supervisors to invest time in the professional development of their colleagues. Then, in our last study, we wanted to explore whether and how supervisors' expectations about the subordinates influence the extent to which supervisors make an effort to coach their subordinates. It was decided to focus on two specific subordinate characteristics, including the likelihood to return and the performance reputation. Well, for this purpose, we conducted an experiment in which supervising auditors were tasked with evaluating the work of a hypothetical subordinate. Well, what did we find here? Well, first, with regard to the low performance reputation, it was found that it matters whether they recur or not. So subordinates who recur under the supervisor's supervision receive significantly more opportunities for professional development compared to subordinates who are unlikely to return under the supervision. Then, when looking at subordinates with a high performance reputation, we found that they receive equal opportunities for professional development and learning. So it does not matter whether they return under the supervision or not. Then, contrary to our expectations, we found that returning subordinates who have a high performance reputation receive significantly fewer opportunities for professional development compared to subordinates who have a low performance reputation and who are recurring. Well, in conclusion, altogether here, our results suggest that supervisors alter the extent to which they invest in professionally developing subordinates. It depends on the perception that they have of the subordinates. Well, to bring it all together, what did we learn in this dissertation? Well, for the supervisors here among us, well, first, create a psychological safe work environment. You can do this by admitting your own errors and by framing errors as learning opportunities. And you also need to provide timely and elaborate feedback. So yeah, provide feedback on what went wrong, but also why it's incorrect. Then for the learners among us, please ask your supervisors actively for coaching and guidance to increase your opportunities for learning and professional development. Then for the firms need to equip supervising auditors with all the required competences and resources necessary to provide effective guidance and explanatory feedback. They can do this in two ways. First, they can provide formal coaching trainings where supervisors learn about effective coaching practices, and two, through designing mentor systems where skilled supervisors help less experienced supervisors in developing their coaching and feedback skills. So, what do you do to learn from errors and help others to learn from their errors? Well, learning from errors is a shared responsibility. It requires commitment from the individual learner, from the supervisor, and from the firm alike. Last but not least, keep in mind, learning may hurt, but it hurts a little bit less when you can do it together as a team. Thank you for your attention, and I give back the word to the prorector.
Thank you very much for your presentation. The opposition will be opened by the chair of the assessment committee, a professor in corporate learning at Maastricht University, Smeets.
Thank you. Esteemed candidate, dear Laura, first I would like to congratulate you for finishing your PhD. 207 pages of hard work, which I have been reading with a lot of interest. I know you have been challenged in many ways, not only to conduct high quality research, but also to enter a world where the doors for research that might throw a critical eye on their work is not always fully embraced. You succeeded, and this is definitely something to be proud of. Your thesis addresses a very interesting topic, learning from errors. As you said in your introduction, when I would randomly interview people in the streets of Maastricht, I'm quite sure that many would agree, yes, sure, you learn from your mistakes. However, reality shows me a different picture. And let me tell you a few small stories, very small ones. When my granddaughter of nearly 2 years old is drawing and coloring, we all applaud for her first attempts to color a picture, although there are still a lot of improvements to make. However, little by little, with a lot of applause and feedback dialogues and support, she learns from her errors and improves very fast. Let's now jump to kindergarten, to Fenna, a 4-year-old daughter of friends of mine. She is regularly tested by her teacher, 4 years old. If her test score is not satisfactory, she gets homework to do during the holidays. She hates the homework, she hates the school, she hates the tests. The room for making errors and to learn from it gets smaller, as you feel. And now I jump to a world we all know very well, the university. Many programs are overloaded with tests and assignments, all graded and rewarded with a bonus or another kind of stick or carrot. They are intended to motivate the students to spend time on studying. However, within this heavy loaded testing program, how many room is there actually for students to make errors and use these as a stepping stone in their learning process? Although my picture is quite black-white, I guess you understand the point I want to make. If during approximately 18 years, errors are experienced as to be avoided, how can we expect professionals to perceive errors as a stepping stone in their learning process? Your PhD thesis aims to give some answers to it, but I have 2 questions for you, and you can choose the one you want to answer. Yeah. So the first one, learning from errors is a well-studied domain. You have chosen to study this topic in the context of auditors. If you now look back at the results of your studies, which results underpin that addressing this topic in this very specific setting was worthwhile to do, as it added new insights to what we already know? That's my first one. The second one, if you agree with my observation that education, and more specifically higher education, is not really preparing for an attitude of valuing errors and learning from it, do you have suggestions for curriculum developers in higher education how to change our curricula in order to support students in learning to develop this attitude? I'm very curious to hear which question you prefer. I'm very curious to hear your answer. And to be honest, errors will be accepted. Up to you.
Thank you, highly esteemed opponent, for your compliments and for this question. Well, 2 questions. So just to summarize, the first question was about what is the added value? What do you add with the results that you gained in the audit field with regard to learning from errors, something that we didn't know before, right? So let me go first to that question. I choose that one, yes. Well, the second one is also nice, but I have to choose. So, well, when we look at this particular field of auditing, as we already saw in the presentation, auditors in daily work are under continuous pressure to perform well, and well, it can have consequences for them when errors are not detected in their work And especially when that happens on the lower ranks, it can, when they are not detected in the audit review, it can actually threaten audit quality. So there is some social impact there as well. We know that from all the several examples we have seen over the news in the past years as well. So in my particular research, maybe it's also nice to mention that we looked at errors that were detected already early in the process. So before they could unfold to negative consequences, right? So we looked more at errors, well, yeah, that don't have really big consequences because they were detected early. And going into your question, we know from research across many domains, also comparable domains like healthcare and aviation, that psychological safety and the support of learning from error climate is a very important one. It's a dominant driver for learning from errors. Well, that's something that we know and that has been proven over and over in the past 20 years. So what we really could show with this dissertation, especially in the interviews that I did, is that I noticed during the interviews, like, hey, okay, they need the psychological safety, but there is something else happening here, why they are not learning. And these were was what also was already hypothesized in theory, like psychological safety is important, but it's not sufficient to initiate learning from errors. So what we found is that it's really important that not only feeling safe, but also, yeah, getting feedback timely, knowing what went wrong, but also, yeah, getting the support in the form of explanatory feedback, specific information, why something is incorrect and how that can be improved. So that support is really important to also provide. And well, all our interviews provided a lot of input into that. Another thing that we found that is new with regard to learning from errors is the role of error strain. There is a paradox a bit in research. So some studies say error strain if there is a negative relationship between error strain and learning, and other research says, well, there's a positive relationship. What we found here is that there is a positive relationship between error strain and reflecting on errors. And so what we say is well, this is in that sense a new result, because what we saw is that there are two mechanisms actually that mediate the link between the high learning from error climate and engagement in social learning activities. It's mediated by error strain, that was new, and a cognitive mechanism as well, relating to reflecting on errors. Another new insight that we also found was that learning from errors with regard to engagement in learning activities first happens individually, and then it happens in social engagement. So it does not co-occur, but it occurs sequentially. So yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you for your answer. No errors, so no opportunity to learn.
Thanks.
No learning. The opposition will be continued by a member of the assessment committee and professor of auditing at the Free University of Amsterdam, Anna Holt.
Thank you, Rector. Dear candidate, dear Laura, I also want to congratulate you on this big accomplishment. You wrote a very well-written dissertation. I really enjoyed reading it. I was particularly impressed by the multitude of methods that you used in your dissertation. I think that's really applaudable. You look at a domain that I also focus on in my research, so I was very curious also to learn from your findings. I've also done, as you know, some research in error management. So, well, very good job. And I believe you bring in several both theoretical but also practical contributions that can really be used by audit firms hands-on. I would like to ask a question about chapter 5, which is your experiment. Maybe not all that surprising, as I do a lot of experiments myself. And I want to focus on H3, which is your interaction hypothesis. So you look here at 2 potential independent variables, determinants of when does a reviewer focus in their feedback on professional development. And the 2 IVs that you use are preparer likelihood to recur and the preparer's reputation. However, as those hypotheses are currently formulated, I'm not entirely clear on where the interactive component lies. It seems like there's some kind of additive effect going on. So there's clearly 2 main effects. And I think that yeah, the intuition behind those is quite clear. But I would like to ask you to elaborate a little bit more. Where should I expect, from a theoretical perspective, the interaction between those 2 variables? So what's the theory behind it? And what exactly is the nature of the interaction? I look forward to your answer.
Yes. Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your compliments on my work, and thank you for this important question. So just to reframe your question here, the question is about chapter 5, the interactive hypothesis, and the question is, how did I come to why would I expect an interaction between the 2 independent variables there?
And what is the interaction?
And what is the interaction? Yeah. So first, to summarize there, what we did is, well, we looked at the 2 variables, independent variables. We looked at specific preparer factors, including the likelihood to return and the performance reputation. So just to provide some idea about the theory behind those 2, well, the likelihood to return, why did we expect that might be an important factor? Well, that's based on the conservation of resources theory, which says that supervisors, well, people in general actually, make a cost-benefit analysis each time when they need to make decisions of how to exert their limited resources that they have. Looking in the particular field of auditing, supervisors have very limited time. So they need to all the time make a decision between the competing demands. On the one hand, oh, do I need to finish my own work first, or shall I first maybe invest in the professional development of these preparers? So looking at the conservation of resources theory, it says that people make decisions in that sense that investing effort in the subordinates can have beneficial effects for themselves, or at least no potential losses. So, but the likelihood to recur, it was expected, like, okay, when this person is going to work again for me, it's actually worthwhile to invest time on this person. So there we expected indeed that this is a positive effect on the focus on professional development. Then with regard to the performance reputation, looking again in the field of auditing, the reputation is something that unfolds typically in this field. So what you typically see is that people use a lot of reputation information when they calculate, like, what can I expect from this person and how much time should I invest in this person, because there are performance evaluations, there is a constant information available with regard to the ranks, and what the organizational reputation theory predicts is that people who have a positive reputation get more positive consequences with regard to career perspectives, power, and so on, while people with a poor reputation get, well, more negative consequences. So in that sense, we have a theory in which we could build for those two main effects, right? And well, we already know from prior research, also in organizational behavior, and also in auditing, that the kind of reputation that you have matters. Well, likelihood to recur, well, there is actually no research about that. It's only theorized until now. So there is a very thin line of research there. So for us, it was also the question like, okay, we know we have those two theories. Based on these theories, what would happen if we combine these theories? What would happen if someone is likely to return and has a high performance reputation? Could there be an additional effect? So that's how we came to the interactive hypothesis, like what would happen there. So it's yeah, actually a combination of those two theories, how we came to the interaction hypothesis.
Yeah, I think you did a great job explaining the two main effects. I guess I'm still struggling a little bit with, if you focus on that cell, right?
Yeah.
So you're saying, so if both are high, you're saying that will be, there will be some kind of additive effect there that would not occur if you only have one of the two.
Yeah.
And just disregarding theory for a moment, can you think of some plausible idea, intuition, why that would be the case? Why do you need both to reach the optimal level?
Yeah. So we know now from my results that is not the case, right? But purely hypothetical. Why would we expect that? Well, so if you recur on the engagements, well, that the supervisor might already have an incentive to actually invest in that person, because that leads to all kind of benefits. Investing now can lead to benefits later, such as, well, less reviewer comments. And on top of that, when you also expect, well, that person is doing very well and you want that person to be promoted, which is also something that I heard in my interviews, for example, in chapter 4, I could imagine that is even more of an incentive to help that person even more. So that's why we expected there an added value. Also, just looking at the interviews, what people were saying there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the opposition will be continued by a member of the assessment committee, assistant professor of educational science at the University of Regensburg, Dr. Helen Josberger.
Thank you. Dear Laura, congratulations. You did a very nice research work and I enjoyed reading. I could continue with compliments, but of course I'm your opponent today and I would like to ask you some questions. You wrote a thesis about learning from errors. That's a very interesting topic. And I'm curious to hear or to learn what kind of errors you experienced during your challenging work conducting your PhD research. So that would be my first question. And my second question would be, what did you learn? And what would you do differently? That would be my third question. And moreover, I'm curious to learn what would be the next study you would like to conduct if you would follow this research line.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your compliments and thank you for those questions. So, well, this is about me. There are many people looking at me, so great. Well, when there is one thing that I learned in my dissertation is that it's very important, especially more in a supervisor role, is to be fallible, right? To show like, okay, I also don't know everything. I also have to learn. I still make errors. So what errors did I experience? Yeah, maybe it's not an error, maybe yes. But I think what I had to learn as a teacher is that I actually need to be very honest and also sometimes say to the students, look, I also don't know this. I also have to look this up. which I didn't do in the beginning, but I've learned from especially my supervising team that it's very important to show some fallibility here. What errors did I experience during conducting my research? Well, there were many. So looking at the most memorable moments, so I was particularly interested in the knowledge and rule-based errors, right? So errors that are made with regard to a deficiency in the available knowledge. I would say that a memorable moment for me was when I wrote my first article, and I was very proud of it, and I thought, okay, this can be submitted, I'm done. And then we had a feedback session with my team, and one of my supervisors said, Laura, you have to make a conclusion in every paragraph. You don't do that. And that was for me a moment that I was like, oh my God, yes. That was for me a very important moment. I became very emotional because I felt, yeah, not so competent at that moment. Like, how can I not know that? So what did I learn there? Well, I think what I did is typically engaging in the social learning activities that are necessary, including the social interaction with my supervisors, right? Like what went wrong here, but also asking them for like, hey, what did you do at this part, at this stage of the PhD? How did you learn from this? What kind of advice would you give me right now? What would I do differently? It's also one of your questions. That is a very good one. What would I do differently? What I actually learned during my PhD as well is ask for feedback also as a subordinate in due time. Don't wait too long, because you can strive for perfection for months and try to make things better and better and better, but in the end I'm still learning, so I have limited knowledge myself. So it's really important to reach out to someone who has more knowledge in order to learn faster, right? And to get feedback and okay, this is what I need to improve, and to work more on that. So I think that is something that if I would do it again, I would do that from the beginning, asking for feedback faster. Then the question next time, if I would could follow up on the research that I did right now, right? Well, looking again at learning from errors. Well, what we did right now is of course all cross-sectional research. We did interviews, and of course there are still many questions there. And I think one of the most important things that might be very interesting as well is we focused on the dependent variable engagement in learning activities, which means that we make the assumption that this leads to a certain learning outcome, like, okay, it will lead to new knowledge and skills, but actually, yeah, we could not measure that due to the kind of design that we chose. So it would be really nice to have a more longitudinal study where we actually can see also with regard to supervisors, how do they act with regard to errors over time, and also how does that learning process unfold over time. I think this is a very important step, and that also allows us then to measure the learning outcomes with regard to, okay, what kind of knowledge has this person gained? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the opposition will be continued by a member of the assessment committee and professor in accounting and assurance services here at Maastricht University, Anne van Stralen.
Thank you, Prorector. Dear candidates, dear Laura, I would like to extend the compliments that you have received so far. Your dissertation addresses a highly relevant topic for audit practice. My first question relates to your first study described in chapter 2. If I look at your table 2.1, I note that the number of respondents that engage in individual learning activities is relatively low. For example, only 9 out of 23 respondents mention recognizing error recurrence. Only 3 out of 23 revisit prior work. Similarly, if I look at your table 2.2 on direct supervisor behaviors, less than half of the respondents is tolerant towards errors. Only 8 out of 23 mention timely feedback. Only 7 out of 23 mention being accessible and provide guidance and elaborate feedback. And only 4 mention the organization of joint evaluations. Still, you conclude, for example, and I quote, we found that most interviewees reported engaging in individual learning from error activities. And beyond creating a psychologically safe work environment, our results highlight that supervisors can foster learning from errors by providing timely and elaborate feedback, being accessible and involved, and organizing joint evaluations. So my question is, what I have to conclude from these tables? Can you actually draw these intuitively appealing conclusions, which you state, given that only very few respondents mention these activities? Or do your tables actually highlight that there's a big problem in the auditing profession with regard to learning from errors and coaching, and that there's still a long way to go? And I would be inclined to conclude the latter based on your findings, but perhaps I'm wrong because you seem to be silent on this. So I look forward to your reaction.
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your compliments and for your question. So your question is with regard to chapter 2, and you were referring to the different tables, right? And you're saying that what you see is that the response is very low. And yeah, you're saying that, like, okay, there might be still a big problem, and maybe this has not unfolded yet. Is that correct? How I'm summarizing it?
Yes, that's correct. Huh? So because you seem to draw conclusions from this, but only very few respondents mention the activities. So is it highlighting a bigger problem, so that we actually have a long way, that there's still a very long way to go with regard to learning from errors and coaching based on these results, given that so few respondents seem to mention this? What could be done to learn from errors and for better coaching?
Just for me to be 100% clear, you are referring here to the individual and social learning activities used by interviewees, right? Interviewees.
Not only the individuals, because that's table 2.1, but also table 2.2 on direct supervisor behaviors.
Yeah. Well, of course, it's if we look at the design that we chose, it's a design with 23 people, 23 auditors, auditors from all the 4 ranks, right? And so what we see in our interviews is that, of course, there are lower responses there, but those low responses, even though it's low, it actually provides a message like what is going on in audit practice. The interviews have given us many detailed insights into the thoughts, the needs, and also the complexities that auditors encounter in their daily work. And in that sense, going with your comment, like, yeah, there is a problem. When I was doing the interviews, that is definitely that I gouged from these interviews. Just to give an example there, I remember very well that many interviewees were saying like, we are focusing more and more now on audit quality in our daily work. And there was this quote from a partner, so on the highest rank, who said like, okay, if I have 1 hour in my busy schedule and I can make a decision, or I spend the time on improving the quality of the audit, or I spend the time on coaching my subordinate, well, I always will go for improving audit quality. And maybe that's only one person who says that, but it's something very relevant and very it illustrates the kind of problems that are currently happening within the audit practice.
Okay, so but you are somewhat silent on this. So the way you formulate your conclusions in chapter 2, you don't really touch on this. So that was, I find this relatively puzzling that you were. So for me, this was very striking, and you seem to be relatively silent on this. So, but it's good that you seem to agree with my conclusion, and I will leave the time now for the others because we still have some opponents to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the opposition will be continued by Associate Professor of Accounting and Information Management here at Maastricht University, Dr. Annelies Renders.
Dear candidates, dear Laura, I also would like to congratulate you upon finishing your dissertation. I think it's a very nice piece of work. But I, of course, also have a question. So in your dissertation, you use like 2 main concepts. One is learning from errors, and the other one is coaching. And so in your chapter 2, you interviewed auditors at all different levels in the hierarchy, including also associates, right? And so chapter 2 is about learning from errors. And then in chapter 4, you interview reviewing auditors about coaching, right? And I was wondering whether you should not make a distinction between these 2 concepts, depending on the hierarchy the auditors are in, right? Because I would argue that for relatively new auditors, so the associates, right, coaching is maybe more important than learning from errors. And because for these new auditors, since they still need to learn the job, they still need to learn how to do it, they probably make a lot of mistakes, but these mistakes themselves don't have very much or very large consequences in terms of audit quality. Right? On the other hand, if you look at auditors higher up in the hierarchy, I would say that learning from errors becomes more important because these errors might have larger consequences. Right? And so when the consequences are larger, these errors, or the people who are less likely to report these errors, right? Which is then why psychological safety becomes more important the higher you are in the hierarchy. In contrast, if you think about these new auditors, since they are still learning how to do the job, psychological safety might not be so important for them. So in your dissertation, you seem to kind of argue that both coaching and learning from errors is equally important at all levels. And I would actually say, well, for me, coaching would be more important for the beginning auditors and learning from errors would be more important for more experienced auditors. So I would like to hear your opinion on my argumentation and also hear whether maybe some findings in your dissertation either align with or refute my argumentation. I look forward to your answer.
Highly esteemed opponents, thank you for your compliments and thank you for your questions. I have to say, honestly, it was really hard for me to understand what you were saying. So I hope I get the question right. So you were saying, well, like there might be a difference with regard to more experienced auditors and less experienced auditors in terms of what they need with regard to coaching and when it comes to learning from errors. You're saying that experienced auditors, when they make an error, it might be maybe even more important that they actually learn from it because it can have bigger consequences. And if I get the question right, your question is, how that is different, or where should be the focus on with regard to the more experienced auditors? Is that right?
Yeah, whether you could argue that the two concepts apply differently in the hierarchy of the auditors.
So that's a question, how the two concepts apply in the higher ranks. Yeah. So maybe it's also good to mention there that the way that I perceive coaching based on the literature is that coaching is a way, of course, to promote learning from errors in that sense. So coaching can be seen as an input factor, and the learning from errors or the engagement in learning activities is then the output. And well, what we see also in our results, it's very interesting that there is a difference. Work experience is, for example, a predicting factor for how people deal with errors. In chapter 3, for example, well, it was done with early career auditors who have 1 to 3 years of experience, but already there we can see that error strain becomes less when with more experience, and engagement in learning activities becomes more with more experience. And these are also results that have been found in other audit literature. For example, in the study of Sackler 2017, it also has been found that work experience makes a difference. And in this study, they also have looked, for example, on the higher ranks. So in that sense, the emotion becomes different, and also coping, being able to cope with errors becomes different in that sense. But I think it's a very important avenue also for future research to test and explore how the relationships that we found in chapter 2 and 3, for example, whether these results also apply to the higher ranks, so the managers and the partners, for example. Does that answer the first part of your question?
Yes, it does.
And with regard to coaching, well, again, we only looked at the seniors and the managers who coach the lowest ranking auditors, right? Well, we did that with a reason, because these are people who still need to learn a lot, and when they make an error, yeah, well, they perform audit standards that form the foundation for the audit. So it's very important to that they yeah, get a very good coaching there. But what we see in other research is that it also indeed matters that on higher ranks, people are coached differently. So on higher ranks, the kind of task that you're doing changes, right? For example, as a manager, well, you are still coached by the partner, and you also have to coach yeah, the seniors and juniors. And well, these people, for example, have multiple role demands there, and they often, yeah, see the partner less. So they work more remote. That's what I see in literature. So coaching also becomes very different, while people on the lower ranks are more working physically together. So they are more often together at the same client. So the whole dynamic changes there with regard to coaching. But looking at my results, coaching is also important at the higher ranks. It's just that the frequency might change of coaching, and also the way that coaching, yeah, is provided. But that's also, again, a very interesting avenue for future research, definitely.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Thank you.
The opposition will be quickly continued by Assistant Professor in Work and Organization Psychology here at Maastricht University, Dr. Margje van der Wiel.
Thank you. Dear candidate, dear Laura, congratulations. I heartily agree with compliments of previous speakers. I find your thesis an example of how to conduct research inspired on theory and practice, and that may contribute to learning and development in the professions. And I said may contribute, as I think the most important challenge has yet to come. Implementation of what we know from theory and research. So from this perspective, I would like to ask you a few questions. So first, I want to discuss the concept mechanism in your thesis. In your thesis, you mentioned several mechanisms that affect learning and development at the preparer, reviewer, and firm level, such as effective, cognitive, and support mechanisms. Could you briefly reflect on what you mean with a mechanism? What mechanism is, in your view, essential to make sure learning and development happen? And second, this is related. I'm curious about perceptions and organization of work tasks within the auditing sector. And as I understand, firm reputation is at stake in delivering high quality audits. Collaboration of reviewers and preparers is a common practice to deliver audits. So good collaboration and learning from each other in the work process, therefore, is required to achieve quality. And this needs motivation, time, and effort. In other words I used in research, it needs deliberate practice. So the main question is how to organize work in such a way that all benefit in the short and the long term. Now, my simple question is, do you agree? And then I was puzzled by some of your suggestions made by another author, and that was that you cited that the author said to create a formal reward structure, that would puzzle. That really puzzled me. So what do you think? Is having time for learning and being able to do work well not fulfilling in itself? Do you need other rewards for that?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your compliments and thank you for your questions. So going directly there into your comment, like having time for coaching and learning from errors, is that not enough? Why do you need to have a culture with a formal reward structure for coaching, right? Well, to go a bit into that question, it's actually also one of the questions that I once got in a conference, like, why would time be important, right? That's actually something that we have seen also in our interviews, that people say, yeah, we just need more time for reflection. We need more time that we can spend on supervision and so on. Would that help? Well, it's a very important thing to have extra time. But suppose that you're working in a work environment where your supervisor says, no, you need to focus on work quality, you need to complete your own work. Then what are you going to do, right? Are you still going to spend that time on coaching your subordinate, or do you think, well, I also need to complete my own work? So it's still all the time that balance that you need to find, like, where to spend my time. So in that sense, having more time to do it would be nice. Well, maybe it's nice to look at myself here. I have been supervising master students, and well, in my department there was a lot of focus on guiding these students, taking time for it, but there was a culture for it. So there was a culture for giving elaborate feedback, taking time for that. But to be honest, I'm sure, even though I am very focused or I am very have a high feedback orientation in that sense, it's very important for me to provide that feedback. And even if I would have the time, more time for it, if I would be in a culture where it said you need to publish, you need to work on your PhD, then I would go along with these values of that work environment, despite I would maybe have more time for it, but I would not have the incentive to use that time. And I think this is the key thing, that there should be a combination of more time indeed for reflection, but also that it becomes a norm to schedule time for coaching and spending time on the professional development of subordinates. And then then you also feel like, okay, it benefits me to actually spend time on coaching because it's important in my work environment. Another question that you had was with regard to the mechanisms, right? So what is a mechanism, and what do I consider as an important mechanism in for learning to happen, right? So yeah, that I actually also goes along with regard to that work environment again. In our last study, for example, we looked into what makes supervisors invest time on coaching and professional development. And one of the things that we found there was that work experience doesn't matter. You can have more experience, but that doesn't make you invest more in subordinates. Feedback orientation is important, but still you're vulnerable to the perception that you have of the subordinates. And in one of our next studies that we are going to publish, we also saw that work environment in that particular study is a very, very important factor. And well, it showed actually that you can have that feedback orientation, but once you are in a work environment that is not so supportive for learning, you're going to invest less time on professional development. So that's a very important mechanism to have the culture, to be encouraged as a supervisor, but also another important mechanism to have there is that you're trained on how to provide feedback that can help another person, not only formally, but also informally. And I think that might be even more important to have really coaching on a job of, well, how to be a supervisor, how to help my subordinates, because this is often just assumed, like, okay, your role is now to be a reviewer, you can do your job, and then people need to think, okay, how should I review, how should I provide feedback? Well, let's do it how it was done as by my supervisors. So in that sense, it also goes back again to that work environment and actually giving support to supervisors how to provide effective coaching is a very important mechanism, because maybe that's an even more important thing. There is one study that have showed that the supervisor's feedback orientation has a positive influence on the subordinate feedback orientation. If that is the case, well, it might be very good to actually encourage that and to provide supervisors with the tools to professionally develop their subordinates, because it also has a long term, right? There is a cascading effect eventually. So I think that's a very important mechanism there.
Time seems to be of the essence for good quality feedback, and in that spirit, the opposition will be concluded by a member of the assessment committee and assistant professor in educational research and development, Dr. Inge Krast.
Dear candidates, also my compliments for your a very well-written dissertation. I think it's a dissertation from which we can all learn something. And needless to say, I have read your dissertation with great interest. And although I'm not working or conducting research myself in the auditing context, I think I see a lot of parallels with my work and my research. For my question, I would actually like to focus on chapter 4 of your dissertation, where you focused on effective coaching of preparers. And in figure 4.1, you summarized your main findings regarding characteristics of effective coaching. And you also focused on influential factors on coach level, coachee, firm level, and also from the context itself. I would like to focus a bit more on the coach in this whole story, which I learned are in your study experienced auditors. What do you think are basic skills these coaches need in order to effectively coach the preparers? And do you think that coaches should be trained in their coaching role? And if so, why? And if so, not why?
Mm-hmm. Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your compliments and thank you for your question. So your question is about yeah, the coaches, as you mentioned it. In my head, it's the supervisors, the supervising auditors, and so your question is, what basic skills do you think that the supervisors need, right? Well, when we look at the literature from the behavioral managerial literature, the basic skills that have been there identified also in the review study of Hagen, for example, as an important one in that field, shows like yeah, listening, for example, is very important. Being able to communicate your message. It's not only in that sense also about the content, but also yeah, thinking about how you bring the message, right? Well, these are the basic skills that are also, of course, important in the audit field. But in my specific study, we also looked at what in this particular field of auditing is necessary in order, yeah, to make coaching effective there. And one of the most important things that we found is, well, we actually also already know that from prior research, is face-to-face. That coaching can happen face-to-face is one of the most important characteristics. Well, when we look now at our COVID times, it became a bit difficult, right? So face-to-face coaching is so important because it actually enables you as a supervisor to directly check with the person, is the person understanding my feedback? But also that person, the subordinate, can directly ask questions. So the communication is much more efficient and effective at that time. And
you may briefly conclude your reply.
Thank you. What was the last question I wanted to say?
The question was if coaches should be trained in these skills.
Yes. So I think that's a very important one. Yeah, supervisors need training because you can assume like, okay, this person has been coached, so that person will also know how to coach. But this is a very different skill that, yeah, also that you need to gain insights into by training, formally and informally. So both are very important there.
Laura Hildegard Smeets, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and of your defense. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and have returned in this room.
Thank you. vind ze geweldig dat ze een paar echt. Ik vind België Duits groot, ik vind dat geweldig. Ja, echt superleuk.
Laura Hildegard Smeets, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and of your defense in view of its positive verdict. And taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Heiselaars is also authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Dear Laura, do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Responsibilities by the authority vested in us by law, in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Laura Hildegard Smeets, the degree of doctor and grant you all the rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed by the official seal of the university.
Dear Laura, and for the first time, dear Dr. Smeets, it is my absolute pleasure to congratulate you on receiving your doctorate degree from Maastricht University, also on behalf of the team, Wim and Roger. I'm sure that your colleagues here at SPE, but also at UCM, your friends, your family, are just as proud as we are that you have completed this PhD project. And there's a lot to be proud of, dear Laura. You started your PhD journey here at IERD in December 2016 with stellar grades in your Master's in Psychology, excellent tutor evaluations, and work experience at Loyalis. In your interview, you told us that you were looking for a challenge. You wanted to learn, develop, improve yourself. And I'm sure we both agree that this is exactly what you experienced with us. So just before Christmas, you became a brand new PhD candidate, and I became a brand new PhD supervisor. And together we dove into the world of academic research and teaching, and we explored the world of auditing. Before going into more detail about your research project, I want to highlight that from the start, we were very eager to learn and to explore your new world. You joined us for everything we did, for our teaching, for workshops with practice, and we had many reflection moments together in which you were always ready with your notebook to make sure nothing ever gets forgotten. And over time, Laura, you became more and more active. You became more and more confident, and you start taking charge of your research project and of your own learning. At the same time, you also became a little bit famous on the third floor. Everyone recognizes your laughter, and we had a lot of opportunities to join in with you. Let me name some highlights. Unforgotten are the SVE staircase and the famous camper incidents of 2016, the Eindhoven railway station abandonment of 2017, the Van der Valk breakfast challenge of 2018, and many, many small moments in Wim's office, the hallway, and the Mensa. Laura, you added kindness, care, and color to our department. Let us return to your work now. Your PhD project, the Auditor Learning Curve Professional Development through Learning from Errors and Coaching, is remarkable in many different ways. First, it is an interdisciplinary PhD combining insights from learning and development with auditing research. This is not an easy feat because it requires you to become at home in 2 domains at once. Second, it was conducted in close collaboration with practice, including shared brainstorms, in-depth interviews, consultancy meeting reports, and some shared videos. Here, your open communication and your honest care for other people shone very brightly. Third, you combine 3 different methods in your dissertation: interviews, surveys, and an experimental study. This is a significant achievement that reflects your level of ambition as well as your level of performance. Fourth, you have already published 2 of your studies. 1 just became available last week, and you have a 3rd paper submitted. This requires resilience, long-term planning, and patience, all of which you have further developed during your PhD. Finally, dramatic pause. Your dissertation includes 4 coherent and complementary studies that clearly contribute to both research and practice, as is evidenced by the number of people interested in reading your dissertation and inviting you for your opinion and your advice. Laura, you can be very proud of all of these achievements. Next to working on your research, you also became a tutor, a coach, a thesis supervisor, and a course coordinator in our bachelor and master's programs. Here too, your desire to learn, your kindness, and your drive to help others was appreciated and recognized. Let me share a best of from your evaluations and these acknowledgements. I want to gratefully thank my supervisor, Laura Smeets, for supporting and challenging me throughout the process. Her enthusiasm and extensive knowledge on the subject contributed highly to my learning process and the delivery of my thesis. I would like to thank Laura, whose valuable input has motivated me to never give up, whose expertise has guided me in my learning process, whose enthusiasm has inspired me. Thank you, Laura. And one more for good measure. I find Laura is very helpful throughout the whole course. She's very open-minded and has created a safe environment for us to talk and constantly give constructive feedback. That's what I valued most about the whole course. Dear Laura, these last few years were more than an academic journey for you. Next to your work here in Maastricht, you lived on your own for the very first time. You met and married your loved husband, Andres, and we enjoyed a wedding full of flair and music together. You challenged yourself when you moved to Boston for a little bit and had your stay at Northeastern University, and you started your dream job as a student advisor at UCM. We were accompanying you through your ups and downs, and we have seen a remarkable change in you. The more challenge you were facing, the more resilient, self-aware, and determined you became. The more you were struggling through this pandemic, combining your full-time job with completing your PhD, the stronger your growth mindset became. So over the last 18 months, it was an absolute pleasure to be your supervisor, despite all of the circumstances. All 3 of us are proud to have been part of your growth towards a competent and capable professional, towards a self-assured and learning person who can work hard just as much as she can enjoy life. Beste Laura, nu is het tijd om te feesten. Ook namens Wim en Roger wil ik graag jou, jouw familie en vrienden bedanken. Und auch Andres, dir möchte ich herzlich gratulieren. Laura, keep your positive energy, your growth mindset, and your kind heart, but most of all, enjoy this important accomplishment. Thank you.
Dear Dr. Smeets, also on behalf of the Board of Deans, I congratulate you with the honor that you have acquired. I now declare this academic ceremony for over. And not quite done there.